This is the MMA Brief Podcast, recapping the world of mixed martial arts every single week, with your host, Brandon Johansson.
Welcome back to the MMA Brief Podcast. Lots gone down since we last talked. 3 huge events, lots of rising stars in the UFC. But we're going to get right into UFC Fight Night 104 from Houston. Saturday before the Super Bowl, same city as the Super Bowl. UFC put on a big card. Kind of flew under the radar. Not a lot of huge household names, but if you're more than a casual fight fan, you knew a couple of the guys on the fight card, or gals for that matter. There's 3 female fights, all which were very good. Khalil Roundtree started the night off on the Fight Pass prelims with a epic knockout with a knee in the first round. It was a good start to the evening, really set the tone. Niko Price was able to follow that up in the second fight of the night with a stunning knockout right at the bell to end round 2. He had been dropped in the first round and sealed the deal literally right at the horn at the end of the second round, and registered his opponent, Alex Morono, unconscious, unfit, and unable to continue for the third and final round. Niko Price with a nice KO in the second fight of the Fight Pass prelims. Moving over to the FS1 prelims, the Tiny Tornado, Tecia Torres, defeated Bec Rawlings by unanimous decision. Bec Rawlings had missed weight by 2 pounds, and Tecia Torres won the fight anyway. She looked great, coming off of a 10-month absence. Chas Skelly won by rear naked choke in his fight against Chris Gritzmaker. Rear naked choke in the second round really wasn't under the chin, but as he said in his post-fight interview, he has a ridiculous squeeze. And you saw the panic on Chris Gritzmacher's face when he squeezed that choke. Even though it wasn't completely underneath and it wasn't cutting off the airflow necessarily, it seemed to be putting Gritzmacher in a lot of pain and a lot of panic. And Chas Skelly was able to get the choke. If you remember his fight before this, he was able to choke out Maximo Blanco in 13 seconds, the fastest submission in WEC UFC featherweight history. Chas Skelly is one to look out for, in my opinion. He's got a nice build for 145 pounds. He's shown that he can make the weight now, and he's working with Henry Hooft and Neil Melanson, one of the best striking coaches and one of the best wrestling coaches in the whole world. So Chas Skelly, someone to look out for at 145. He's not cracked the top 15 quite yet. I think that he's going to be getting those fights here coming up soon. Curtis Blaydes absolutely ragdolled his opponent, Alex Milstead. He outweighed Milstead by about 30 pounds and immediately looked for the takedown. Milstead got back up. He took him down again. I mean, it was like my girlfriend called it WCW. It was crazy. And eventually, Milstead sustained a knee injury. His knee just went the wrong way on more than one occasion, and the bout was stopped early in the second round due to injury. Obviously, a hungry, up-and-coming heavyweight contender like Curtis Blaydes was not happy with his result, but a win is a win, and he showed a lot of dominance. He's green, but he could be another heavyweight star here in the future if they groom him right, give him the right fights. If he can learn at the pace he needs to, he could be the next Francis Ngannou type of fella, who Ngannou scored a huge win last weekend against Andrei Arlovsky, former champion. So there's a couple exciting there's new blood in the heavyweight division now. And there's new blood in several divisions. So it's exciting. A lot of people are saying that there aren't stars in the UFC right now, which is true. But I think that we're going to see new people emerge as stars because the talents there, the fighters are as good as they've ever been. It's just going to take a little bit of time to see who's going to be that star. Is it going to be Ngannou in the heavyweight division? Can he crack through some of the elite? Knocking out Arlovsky is a big deal, especially the way he did it. But we'll see. He's calling out Cain Velasquez. We'll see how he fares against someone like Cain Velasquez, which, in my opinion, is probably just a lot more experienced and just a totally different animal than Francis Ngannou's ever faced. So it's exciting. There's new blood in every division, almost every division, especially the women's division. Women's divisions. Strawweight, bantamweight, and of course, next week we're going to see the invention of a whole new division, 145 pounds. So women's MMA is quite good right now. Shevchenko was able to beat Juliana Pena in last week's main event by armbar in the second round. And she's going to fight the champion Amanda Nunes. Nunes, of course, knocked out Ronda Rousey. She's choked out Miesha Tate. Nunes is a bad mamma jamma. But Shevchenko, she looks like a legitimate contender. And Juliana Pena, a couple wins, and she's going to get right back in there in the mix. So there are some exciting fighters in every division. Strawweight, I was particularly impressed with this past weekend when you had 3 strawweight fights. And Tisha Torres versus Beck Rollins. And then you had Jessica Andrade versus Angela Hill, which, in my opinion, was the best female fight I've ever seen. Angela Hill is so tough, it's insane. Jessica Andrade has beautiful striking. And, man, it was a great fight. I loved every minute of it. I watched the highlights of it, and I knew it was never going to do it justice, and it didn't. You got to watch that whole fight and just appreciate the toughness from Hill and really just admire the technique of Jessica Andrade. She mixes it up to the body and the head really well. She looked like she was well conditioned because she was going hard for 15 straight minutes. And she's going to get the next crack at Joanna Jędrzejczyk. So, like I said, lots of blood. The winners from past 2 fights, the past 2 weekends, they're getting title shots. So these are the stars of the future right here. We're seeing the fights go down. We are witnessing stars be born each and every Saturday. And if you're too stupid to realize that the stars are being born, it's not my problem. You got to tune into the fights. You got to watch them. And you will see that there is talent and there are stars here. We just got to be patient, man. I totally believe it. Marcel Fortuna made his UFC debut where he was wildly undersized, 210 pounds against the 260-pound animal Anthony Hamilton in a heavyweight contest. I thought that this was a bad matchup for Fortuna just based on the fact he was giving up 50-plus pounds. But he ended up sustaining a rather nasty headbutt eyebrow gouge. Nasty cut. And I think it created a sense of urgency, and Fortuna was able to land 2 right hands, 1, and then about 20 seconds later he really knocked Anthony Hamilton into next week, which is just a perfect overhand right down the middle, straight down the pipe. If you have to even watch it in slow motion to see where it landed, because Hamilton just kind of flopped to the mat, and afterwards he tried to get up and he ran towards the cage and he was falling all over. He was badly compromised from that right hand, or the pair of right hands rather, from Fortuna. So nice UFC debut from him. He'll probably fight at 205. He made his debut on less than a week's notice. So he fought at 210 pounds in the heavyweight division, and we'll probably see him at light heavyweight. Ovince St. Preux was upset by Volkan. That's his first name. I don't know how to say his last name, but he was upset by a Vulcan. I thought it was very, you know, it wasn't one of the best fights of the night. Unfortunately, Andrade versus Hill was the first fight of the FS1 main card, and that fight I believe should have been the co-main event because of the rankings and the fact that Angela Hill was the Invicta Fighting Championship strawweight champion. She came over from there, and she's fighting Andrade, who was going to get a title shot if she won. So I really thought that should have been the co-main event slot, and it came out really delivered. It brought up the energy so much that by the time it hit the middle of the main card, not that the fights were bad, but that fight was just so exciting. It kind of just came down a little bit. So Ovince St. Preux versus the Vulcan, I will call him, was a good fight, and I really liked how Ovince finished the fight, but it was really just a case of too little too late. He hit Vulcan with some really big shots at the end, all the way down to the bell, but just too little too late, and he lost a split decision, so that's rough for him. He's lost 3 in a row now. Decision to John Jones, got knocked out by Jimmy Manuwa, and then lost a fight to an unranked opponent making their UFC debut. So Ovince St. Preux, after 3 losses, where does he go from here? I'm not sure. We'll see. James Vick pulled off a Darce choke against Abel Trujillo in the 3rd round. Beautiful submission. James Vick actually had some trouble syncing it up because his arms are so long. He's such a lengthy 155-pound fighter that he couldn't really get a good wrap around again on Abel Trujillo. His arms are just so long, but he stunned Trujillo with a flying knee, and then he was able to finally sync up that Darce choke. It was his second attempt at that submission, and finally was able to lock it up. Exciting fight. James Vick, I've been a big fan of, coming off his first loss as a professional, so it was an important win for James Vick. Felice Herrig defeated Alexa Grasso. She looked fantastic. It's her second straight fight that she's looked absolutely fantastic after having some rather lackluster performances, but she got on the microphone after her fight and said that she had some serious health problems and she wasn't able to perform to her the best of her abilities, and she wants Paige VanZant. She wants that fight back. She thinks that that was not the real Felice Herrig in there with Paige VanZant. Makes somewhat of sense, I guess. Somewhat of sense, because Felice is kind of on a roll. Paige VanZant, although she's been main eventing, she had that one jumping switch kick knockout of Bec Rawlins. But, she, I don't know. I don't know if you can make that fight. But Felice wants it back. And she says she swears that it was not her who Paige fought. We'll see what happens. She also said that she'd take Michelle Waterson, who just recently beat Paige. So either fight would be good for Felice, because she could get that win back from Paige, or she could beat a top contender like Michelle. That would raise her stock tremendously. So that was the co-main event, and the Korean Zombie made his much anticipated return after 3.5 years. He returns to the UFC. He had mandatory military responsibilities in Korea, and last time we saw him was in the title fight against Jose Aldo more than 3 years ago. So he comes back, main eventing, Super Bowl weekend card in Houston against Dennis Bermudez, top 10 featherweight. And he gets the first round knockout of Dennis Bermudez. He looked great and looked like he hadn't missed a beat. Dana White was happy afterwards. He said they've been wanting to go to Korea, and Chan Sung Jung, or the Korean Zombie as we call him, might have just made that a reality with his big win, get the fans excited, and make it pretty easy to sell out a stadium. So let's switch over to fight preview for UFC 208. Main event is Holly Holm versus Germaine de Randamie for the inaugural women's featherweight title. 145 pounds. There's a new division, and Chris Cyborg is not going to be fighting for that title. But the point is, Holly Holm, coming off of 2 straight losses. She lost to Miesha Tate. She lost her title. She lost to Shevchenko, who's fighting Amanda Nunes for the title. So she's lost against tough competition. She's going up fighting Germaine de Randamie, who's an incredible Muay Thai expert. And of course, we know Holly Holm's got the boxing background, kickboxing background. So 2 really good strikers. And sometimes these fights come down to maybe who knows more about the other aspects of MMA. Maybe Holm thinks she has an advantage in the takedown department, or vice versa. So that should be an exciting fight. That's the main event. And the card has added some depth. I did call this card barely buyable at one point, but it has added some fights. Mainly Anderson Silva versus Derek Brunson, which stylistically is just an amazing matchup, and I just can't wait to see it happen in real life, because if you watch the highlights of Derek Brunson, he just comes forward with his hands down, he lunges at you, and Anderson Silva just loves that. So in my head, it's, does Anderson Silva counter him leaping in, or does his leaping in catch Anderson Silva like Chris Weidman was able to do, or like Michael Bisping was able to do when he rocked and dropped Anderson Silva in their fight? So Derek Brunson has a serious chance of knocking out Anderson Silva, which seems crazy to think that it's been this fall from grace for Anderson Silva, when just a few years ago he was literally, you didn't think you could knock him out. He would stand up his back against the cage and let Stephan Bonner throw bombs on him. He just thought he couldn't be knocked out, but all of that invincibility has been washed away, especially after the leg break and the second fight with Chris Weidman. But Anderson Silva versus Derek Brunson. Anderson Silva needs this win. He claims he does not need the win. He said he's fighting because he loves to fight. He's not fighting. He already did everything for his legacy, which is easy to say because he's not winning. If he was winning, then he'd be probably singing a different tune. He's been fighting tough guys. Only people he's lost to are champions. Michael Bisping's the current middleweight champion. Most recent loss was against Daniel Cormier, the 205-pound champion. So he's not losing to schmucks, but he needs a win badly against Derek Brunson. He can say that it won't affect his legacy if he loses to a guy like Derek Brunson, but in my mind, if he gets to the point where he's losing to people like Derek Brunson, it's like, hang it up, please. I don't need to see this anymore. Other fights on UFC 208, Tim Boesch, the Barbarian, versus Jacare Souza. Should be a good contest. You would think Jacare should win, but Tim Boesch is he's a hardy fella, and he's game. As long as he's still in there, he's dangerous. So Jacare needs to go in, try to take him out, probably by submission. I would say that's his best. Although Jacare's stand-up has looked really good, I would think that Tim Boesch's biggest hole in his game would be his submission defeats. And Jacare is just absolutely world-class when it comes to submissions. So, also have Glover Teixeira versus Jared Cannonier in a matchup. There's a real log jam at 205 pounds. In my opinion, you've got the number one guy, John Jones, who can't stay out of trouble, essentially, whether it's legally or performance-enhancing drugs or whatever dick pills it may be. He can't just keep his number one status. So temporarily, Daniel Cormier is the number one guy. But really, John Jones is number one. Cormier is number two. That's established. And then Rumble would be number three, and he's fighting Cormier. And Gustafsson is number four in my book. But it just goes along that line. Gustafsson can't beat Rumble. He can't beat Jones. He can't beat Cormier. And he can't beat Rumble. And then Rumble can't beat Cormier unless you can in the rematch here coming up. So it's just kind of this logjam. There's a real clear definition of who's who. And then Ryan Bader, who looks like he's on his way out to Bellator. they need some new blood, and Jared Cannonier, I believe, is that type of person. If he can come in, and I hate to say it, I love Glover Teixeira, but he's had his chance. He worked his way up to a shot with John Jones. He got beat the fuck up, took it like a man. Unanimous decision loss to the champion, best ever, no big deal. But, losing to Rumble Johnson in 13 seconds, losing that tooth, getting knocked out like that was pretty bad, and he'd have to have a crazy resurgence for us to be sitting here talking about him as a serious contender in that division, and he's around number 4 or 5 in that division. So if Cannonier can beat Teixeira, I think it would benefit the UFC greatly, because you can kind of get some new blood in there. Teixeira goes down, he can, assume more of a gatekeeper role, which, like I said, I love Glover Teixeira. But when you have this, if Rumble loses to Daniel Cormier, you have such a pattern that's already established. MMA math doesn't work, but at 205 it kind of does work. You can kind of say, Gustafson's not beating the top 3. Rumble isn't beating the top 2. DC can't beat Jones. It's just, I don't know. It's just the way it goes. I don't like it. The UFC doesn't like it. And they need some fresh talent. So look out for that one. Glover Teixeira, can he get back on track? Can he, show this up-and-coming fighter? Not on my watch. You're not making a name off me. And put himself right back in there in some big fights. And put a streak together. It's not over for Glover. I'm not saying that. But I'm talking about the potential of the future stars of the UFC. That's what it's all about. They need star power, and that's what they're doing here with this matchup. Great matchups. I love the matchups from Mick Maynard ever since he took over for Joe Silva. He's been doing a really, really good job. Also on UFC 208, Jim Miller versus Dustin Poirier. Really looking forward to this fight. 2 great lightweights. Should be a fantastic fight. Really should. Can't wait to see what happens. Nick Lentz is on the card. Uncle Creepy Ian McCall is fighting on the card. Ryan LaFleur versus Rohan Carneiro. Rick Glenn versus Felipe Nover. Belal Muhammad is going to open up the Fight Pass prelims against 9-1 Randy Brown. So this card, I'm very interested. Can't wait to watch the fights. Going to be excellent. Talk all about the matchups to make after UFC 208. The matchups to make looking forward down the line here. Jorge Masvidal made a lot of noise, knocking out Cowboy Cerrone 2 weeks ago in Denver. And he's number 5 now in welterweight. So there's a lot of fighters to get excited about in the UFC. Thank you so much for listening. Catch you next week.